strength within you, an indomitable force that makes you believe you can conquer anything? But what if, with that strength, came a flaw so deep, so all-consuming, that it threatened to undo everything you've ever accomplished? Would you recognize it before it's too late? Or would you, like Samson, fall prey to your own desires? Samson was no ordinary man, blessed with a strength beyond measure. He was destined to lead his people, to be a hero in a time of darkness. But like all heroes, Samson had his weaknesses. Weaknesses that would lead him into the arms of betrayal and bring him to his knees. Join me as we delve into the story of Samson, a man of unmatched strength, brought low by the very things he sought to control. In the ancient lands of Israel, during a time when the people were under the oppressive rule of the Philistines, there lived a man of unparalleled strength, a hero among his people, Samson. But as with all great heroes, Samson's life was marked by a fateful flaw that would lead to his tragic downfall. This is the story of Samson and Delilah, a tale of strength and seduction, of love and betrayal that has echoed through the ages. Samson's story begins not with his feats of strength, but with a divine encounter that foretold his extraordinary life. His parents, Manoah and his wife, were a devout couple who had long been childless. In a culture where children were seen as a blessing from God, their barrenness was a heavy burden. They prayed fervently, seeking a miracle. One day, as Manoah's wife was alone in the fields, an angel of the Lord appeared to her, radiant and awe-inspiring. "You are barren and have borne no children," the angel said, "but you shall conceive and bear a son. Now, therefore, be careful not to drink wine or strong drink, and do not eat anything unclean, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb to the day of his death." This divine encounter filled Manoah's wife with a mixture of fear and joy. When she told her husband, he too was struck by the gravity of the message. Together they prayed for guidance, and the angel returned confirming the prophecy. This child, Samson, was destined to begin the deliverance of Israel from the Philistines, a people who had tormented them for years. From his birth, Samson was set apart, a living symbol of God's power and promise. His parents raised him under the strict Nazirite vow, forbidding him from cutting his hair, drinking wine, or coming into contact with the dead. As he grew, it became clear that Samson was no ordinary child. His strength was unmatched, his spirit indomitable. Yet, with great power came great responsibility, and the seeds of his downfall were already being sown. As a young man, Samson was driven by a fierce sense of justice and an equally fierce temper. His early encounters with the Philistines were marked by violence and retribution. One of the most famous stories of his youth is the slaying of the lion. As he was traveling to Timnah to seek a Philistine wife against the wishes of his parents, a young lion came roaring towards him. Without hesitation, Samson seized the lion and tore it apart with his bare hands, as if it were nothing more than a young goat. This act was a sign of things to come, a glimpse into the formidable power that Samson possessed. Later, when Samson returned to Timnah to marry the Philistine woman, he found that bees had made honey in the carcass of the lion. He scooped out some of the honey and ate it, sharing it with his parents, but not telling them where it came from. This incident would later lead to a riddle at his wedding feast, a riddle that would spark a deadly conflict with the Philistines. At the feast, Samson challenged the Philistines with a riddle. Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. Unable to solve it, the Philistines coerced Samson's wife into revealing the answer by threatening her and her family. When they answered correctly, Samson was enraged. In his fury, he killed 30 Philistine men, taking their clothes to pay the wager, and stormed off in anger, leaving his wife behind. This act of violence was the beginning of a bloody vendetta between Samson and the Philistines. Each time they retaliated, Samson responded with even greater ferocity. He once captured 300 foxes, tied their tails together in pairs, attached torches to them, and set them loose in the Philistines' grain fields, vineyards, and olive groves, destroying their harvest. The Philistines, desperate to stop him, sent an army to capture Samson. But when they surrounded him at Lehi, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. He found the jawbone of a donkey and used it to kill 1,000 men. After the battle, exhausted and thirsty, Samson cried out to God, who miraculously provided water from a hollow place in the ground, reviving his strength. Samson's downfall, however, was not to come from the battlefield, but from his own heart. Despite his devotion to his people and his God, Samson had a weakness for Philistine women. He had already been entangled with one, but it was Delilah who had become his ultimate undoing. Delilah was a woman of striking beauty and cunning intellect, living in the valley of Sorek. Little is known about her early life, but it is believed that she was a Philistine, perhaps of noble blood. Delilah was not just beautiful. She was ambitious, calculating, and she knew how to manipulate the desires of men to her advantage. When Samson entered her life, she saw an opportunity, a chance to secure wealth and power beyond her wildest dreams. The Philistine rulers, desperate to rid themselves of Samson, approached Delilah with a tempting offer. 100 pieces of silver from each of them if she could uncover the secret of Samson's strength. The weight of the silver, heavy enough to make any ordinary person waver, was light in Delilah's hands. She accepted the offer, her mind already spinning with a plan to ensnare the mighty Samson. Samson was smitten by Delilah from the moment they met. Her beauty, her charm, her allure, they were irresistible to him. But what Samson saw as love, Delilah saw as an opportunity. She played the role of the loving partner perfectly, earning his trust, slowly weaving herself into the fabric of his life. Delilah's charm was a weapon as deadly as any sword. "Tell me, my love," she would whisper, her voice a soft purr that sent shivers down Samson's spine. "What is the secret of your strength? How can you be bound so that you might be subdued?" She asked the question with a playful smile, as if it were a game. But underneath her laughter was a deadly seriousness. Samson, in his infatuation, teased her with false answers. "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I shall become weak like any other man," he said one night, smiling at her naivety. But Delilah was no fool. She reported his words to the Philistine rulers, who brought her the bowstrings. That night, as Samson slept, Delilah bound him and called the Philistines to ambush him. But when Samson awoke, he snapped the bowstrings as if they were nothing. Delilah, undeterred, tried again. "If they bind me with new ropes that have never been used, I shall become weak, like any other man." But when Delilah tried this trick, the ropes too snapped like threads. Frustration simmered beneath her calm exterior, but she pressed on, driven by the promise of wealth and power. "Perhaps," Samson mused one evening as they lay together under the stars, If you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web and fasten it with a pin, then I shall become weak." Delilah followed his instructions, her hands trembling slightly as she worked. But even then, when the Philistines came, Samson awoke and tore the loom apart. Delilah's frustration grew, and with it, her resolve. She was relentless, knowing that time was running out. She began to play on Samson's emotions, weaving a web of guilt and sorrow. "How can you say you love me when your heart is not with me?" she accused, her eyes filled with feigned hurt. "3 times you have mocked me and have not told me where your great strength lies." Samson, wearied by her persistence and blinded by his love, finally gave in. He revealed the truth. "No razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak, like any other man." That night, as Samson slept on her lap, Delilah called for a man to shave the 7 locks of his hair. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with tension. As the razor sliced through his hair, Samson's strength ebbed away, leaving him vulnerable, human. Delilah, feeling the weight of his betrayal, called for the Philistines, who seized Samson, gouged out his eyes, and bound him in bronze shackles. The mighty hero was led away in chains, reduced to grinding grain in the prison of Gaza. For Samson, the darkness was not just physical, it was spiritual. Blinded and humiliated, he was forced to confront the consequences of his actions. The man who had once been Israel's greatest hope was now a broken prisoner, mocked and scorned by his enemies. Yet, even in his despair, there remained a flicker of the old Samson, a remnant of the strength and faith that had defined his life. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Samson's hair began to grow back, a symbol of his slow, painful journey towards redemption. The Philistines, in their arrogance, failed to notice this subtle change, believing that they had completely destroyed their enemy. But Samson's strength was not merely in his hair. It was in his renewed faith, his understanding that his power came from God alone. The Philistines, unaware of Samson's growing strength, decided to bring him out during a festival to their god Dagon. The temple was filled with people, nobles and commoners alike, all eager to see the mighty Samson reduced to a mere spectacle. They laughed and jeered as he was brought out in chains, a shadow of the man he once was. But as Samson stood between the pillars of the temple, something stirred within him. He asked the servant who led him to place his hands on the pillars that supported the temple. "Let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them," he said, his voice calm, almost resigned. The temple was packed with people, including all the lords of the Philistines, and on the roof about 3,000 men and women watched as Samson was paraded before them. Samson, feeling the weight of his past actions and the need for redemption, prayed one final prayer. "O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." With all his might, Samson pushed against the pillars. The temple shook, the walls groaned, and before anyone could react, the entire structure came crashing down. The temple collapsed, killing Samson and thousands of Philistines in the process. In his death, Samson achieved what he had set out to do. He struck a devastating blow against the enemies of his people, and in doing so, he found redemption. The story of Samson and Delilah is one of the most compelling narratives in the Bible. It is a tale of love and betrayal, of strength and weakness, of a hero brought low by his own desires. Samson, despite his flaws, remains a symbol of faith and redemption, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we can find strength in God. Delilah, on the other hand, serves as a cautionary figure, a symbol of how deceit and greed can lead to ruin. Together, their story continues to captivate and inspire, a timeless lesson in the power of love and the dangers of betrayal. Samson's legacy is complex. He was a man of extraordinary physical strength, yet his true strength lay in his faith and his willingness to seek redemption, even in his final moments. His story is a reminder that no matter how far we fall, there is always a path back to God, always a chance to find redemption. Delilah's story too offers lessons about the dangers of manipulation, the consequences of betrayal, and the ultimate emptiness of material gain when it comes at the cost of one's integrity. As we reflect on their story, we are reminded that strength is not just about physical power. It is about moral courage, about staying true to one's beliefs, and about finding the strength to rise even after the hardest falls. The tale of Samson and Delilah, with all its drama, intrigue, and tragedy, will forever be etched in the annals of history. A story as old as time and as relevant as ever.
The mark of betrayal, a Cain and Abel mystery. The wind howled through the desolate hills of Eden, carrying with it the faint scent of blood. The once lush and verdant fields, now tainted with the echo of violence, whispered a tale of betrayal so ancient that it had etched itself into the very bones of the earth. In the shadow of a distant mountain, two brothers stood apart, separated not by distance, but by something far deeper and more insidious: jealousy, resentment, and the weight of a terrible secret. The mystery unfolds. It was the season of sacrifice, a time when men offered their best to the Lord, a ritual as old as the dawn of their banishment from paradise. Cain, the eldest son of Adam and Eve, stood among his fields, surveying the fruits of his labor with a keen eye. His hands were calloused, his skin tanned from years under the scorching sun. He was a man of the soil, a farmer who took pride in coaxing life from the earth. But on this day, there was something different about him, a shadow in his gaze, a restlessness that seemed to eat away at his soul. Meanwhile, Abel, the younger brother, tended to his flock on the nearby hills. He moved with a grace that spoke of ease and contentment, his face aglow with the satisfaction of a man whose work had found favor in the eyes of the Lord. The contrast between the brothers was stark. Where Cain was hardened, Abel was soft. Where Cain was weighed down with unspoken thoughts, Abel was light, unburdened by the weight of his existence. But beneath the surface, something dark was brewing, and it would soon spill over into violence. The setup: a suspicious offering. The tension between the brothers had been building for weeks, though no one could see it, not even their parents. Adam, lost in his own silent sorrow for the paradise he had lost, and Eve, consumed by the toil of survival, could not sense the growing rift between their sons. On the day of the offering, Cain stood before his altar, his hands trembling as he arranged the fruits of his harvest: wheat, barley, figs, and dates. He had selected the best of what he had, or so he believed, but as he glanced toward Abel's altar, doubt crept into his mind. Abel's sacrifice, an unblemished lamb, its wool as white as snow, was already burning, the smoke rising in thick, fragrant clouds to the heavens. The smell was intoxicating, pure, the kind of offering that would surely please the Lord. Cain's heart pounded in his chest as he knelt before his own altar, lighting the fire beneath the fruits of his labor. But the smoke from his offering was thin, weak, dissipating into the air as if it held no substance. He glanced at Abel's altar again, watching as the flames consumed the lamb in a blaze of light, while his own offering sputtered and fizzled out. The Lord's favor was clear. Abel's sacrifice had been accepted, while Cain's had been rejected. The suspense builds, a dark seed planted. That night, Cain could not sleep. The rejection gnawed at him, a festering wound that refused to heal. His thoughts turned darker with each passing hour, spiraling into a pit of envy and anger. Why had the Lord accepted Abel's sacrifice and not his? Had he not worked just as hard, perhaps harder, to bring forth his offering? Was he not deserving of the same favor? As the moon hung low in the sky, Cain rose from his bed, his mind consumed by a single, haunting question. What if Abel wasn't as innocent as he appeared? In the dead of night, Cain wandered the fields, his footsteps silent on the soft earth. He moved with purpose, though he wasn't sure where he was headed or what he sought. As he walked, the wind seemed to whisper Abel's name, taunting him, mocking his failure. Suddenly, Cain stopped. In the distance, he saw a figure moving through the darkness, Abel, returning from a late-night vigil with his flock. Cain's heart raced as he watched his brother approach, a strange, unbidden thought creeping into his mind. What if Abel had done something to ensure his offering was accepted? What if Abel had found a way to deceive the Lord? The confrontation, accusations, and deception. "Abel!" Cain called out, stepping from the shadows. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a tension that made Abel stop in his tracks. "Brother?" Abel's voice was calm, but there was confusion in his eyes as he looked at Cain. "Why are you out here so late?" "I could ask you the same," Cain replied, his eyes narrowing. "What were you doing out with the flock?" "Watching over them as I always do," Abel said, his tone even. But there was something in his brother's gaze that unnerved him, a darkness he had not seen before. "Is something troubling you, Cain?" "Troubling me?" Cain's voice rose, sharp and accusatory. "You know what troubles me, Abel. You know why the Lord accepted your sacrifice and not mine, don't you?" Abel's brow furrowed in confusion. "Cain, I offered the best of my flock, as you did with your harvest. The Lord's will is his own. I do not understand it any more than you do." But Cain wasn't listening. His mind was clouded with suspicion, jealousy, and a growing sense of betrayal. "What did you do, Abel?" he demanded, stepping closer. "What did you do to make sure the Lord looked favorably upon you? Did you pray harder? Did you offer something I couldn't?" Abel shook his head, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Brother, I did nothing but offer what I had. This is not a competition." "Isn't it?" Cain interrupted, his voice low and dangerous. "It's always been a competition, Abel. You've always been favored, by the Lord, by our parents, everyone, and I am left in your shadow." The turning point. A sinister plan. As the two brothers stood in the moonlit field, the tension between them reached a breaking point. Cain's fists clenched, his heart pounding in his chest. He had come here seeking answers, but now all he felt was rage, a rage that consumed him, leaving no room for reason or mercy. "What if you weren't here?" Cain whispered, more to himself than to Abel. "What if you were gone? Then there would be no one left to stand in my way." Abel took a step back, fear creeping into his eyes. "Cain, what are you saying?" But Cain didn't answer. His mind was already made up, his course set. In the silence of the night, The sound of his heartbeat was the only thing he could hear as he reached for the stone at his feet. With a swift, brutal motion, Cain swung the stone toward his brother, and in that instant, the world seemed to freeze. Abel's eyes widened in shock, his hands flying up to ward off the blow. But it was too late. The stone struck him with a sickening thud, and he crumpled to the ground, his blood seeping into the earth. The plot twist. The voice of judgment. Cain stood over his brother's lifeless body, breathing heavily. The deed was done. Abel was gone, and with him, the weight of Cain's envy. So he thought. But as the blood soaked into the soil, something strange happened. The earth beneath Cain's feet seemed to tremble, as if the very ground was crying out in horror. And then a voice, low and thunderous, spoke from the heavens. "Cain, where is your brother?" Cain's blood ran cold. He looked around wildly, but there was no one else in the field, no one to accuse him. And yet the voice seemed to come from everywhere, surrounding him, pressing down on him with the weight of divine judgment. "I don't know," Cain stammered, backing away from Abel's body. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The silence that followed was deafening, but then the voice returned, filled with a terrible certainty. "What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." The final revelation, the mark of betrayal. As the truth of his crime settled over him, Cain fell to his knees, his hands stained with his brother's blood. The weight of his guilt was crushing, and in that moment, he knew there was no escape from what he had done. The Lord had seen everything. And then, the final blow came. The voice spoke once more, but this time it was different, cold, distant, filled with sorrow. "Because of what you have done, the earth will no longer yield its strength to you. You will be a restless wanderer, marked for all to see." Cain cried out in despair, but it was too late. As he looked down at his hands, a strange mark began to form on his skin, a sign of his guilt, a mark that would forever remind him, and all who saw him, of the betrayal he had committed. A suspenseful legacy. The fields of Eden were quiet once more, but the air was thick with the weight of what had transpired. Cain, now marked and cursed, walked into the wilderness, his heart heavy with the knowledge of the brother he had slain. His story would be passed down through the generations, a tale of jealousy, betrayal, and divine judgment. As Cain wandered the earth, a restless nomad, the mark on his skin would serve as a reminder to all who encountered him, a mark that could not be hidden or erased. And though his body would fade into dust with time, the memory of his crime would endure, whispered from one generation to the next. Cain's punishment was not just exile, it was a life of unending remorse, the knowledge that he had struck down his own flesh and blood. He had lost his brother, but he had also lost himself. And thus, the tale of Cain and Abel became a dark parable, a warning to those who let envy fester in their hearts, to those who let rage consume them, until they are capable of unspeakable acts. It is said that even today, Cain's mark lingers in the hearts of those who let hatred take root, forever cursed to wander the earth, just as he did. For Cain, there was no escape from the weight of his crime, no peace, no rest, only the silence of the earth and the haunting echoes of his brother's blood, crying out for justice. Have you ever tried to run from something, only to realize you can't escape your destiny? What if that something was a command from God, and running meant being swallowed by a giant fish? Grab a snack, kick back, relax, and deep dive with us into this belly of a tale about a man on the run from God named Jonah. Jonah was an ordinary man, a prophet of God, living in the quiet and familiar comfort of his home. His life was simple, marked by routine, filled with moments of peace where he could hear the wind gently whispering through the trees, the crackling fire at night, and the stillness of a life untouched by danger or chaos. It was a peaceful existence, one that made him feel at ease with the world. But all of that was about to change. One evening, as the sky began to darken and a storm brewed on the horizon, a powerful voice echoed through the air, shattering the calm.
Jonah.
The voice of God was unmistakable, resonating through the very fabric of creation, a sound that made the earth itself tremble. Jonah, sitting by his fire, froze, the cup he held in his hand trembling. His heart leapt in his chest, knowing that when God called, something serious was at hand.
Yes, Lord?
Jonah's voice quivered with a mixture of reverence and fear. He looked to the heavens, his eyes wide, awaiting the command that would change his life.
Go to Nineveh.
The voice of God boomed.
The great city of wickedness. Their evil has risen up before me, and they must repent. Tell them this: if they do not turn from their wicked ways, their destruction will come swiftly.
Nineveh. That word alone sent shivers down Jonah's spine. Nineveh was no ordinary city. It was the epitome of sin, a place where cruelty, greed, and every manner of wickedness ran rampant. Jonah had heard the tales, their violence, their utter disregard for life, their hatred of anything good. He had never imagined he'd be asked to go there, to face those people head-on.
Lord, are you sure?
Jonah whispered to himself, as if trying to bargain with the Almighty. He felt the weight of the command sinking in, dread wrapping around him like chains.
They'll kill me before I even get a chance to speak.
He imagined himself standing in the center of that wretched city, surrounded by murderers and thieves. His heart pounded. A long silence followed. Jonah stood up, staring into the distance, his mind racing. He knew the road to Nineveh lay east, but there was a way out. If Nineveh was east, Jonah could run west, far west. He could escape this fate, couldn't he?
Nope,
Jonah said, his voice suddenly frantic.
no way, I'm not going to Nineveh. I'll go anywhere but there.
He grabbed his cloak, threw it over his shoulders, and darted towards the port city of Joppa. If he could get on a ship heading in the opposite direction, to Tarshish, the farthest place he could imagine, he could hide from God's command. It was an absurd plan, but Jonah was desperate. He needed to escape. The port of Joppa was bustling with activity, filled with traders, sailors, and travelers. The air was thick with the salty scent of the sea, mixed with the stench of fish and sweat. Jonah pushed his way through the crowd, his eyes wild with panic, muttering to himself as he clutched the small bag of coins he'd hastily grabbed.
Tarshish! I need to get to Tarshish!
Ahead of him, he spotted a captain overseeing the loading of goods onto a ship. Without thinking, Jonah rushed forward, his breath coming in quick, shallow gasps.
Hey!
Jonah called out, his voice cracking.
Are you sailing to Tarshish?
The captain, a gruff man with weathered skin and a long beard, barely glanced up from the crates being loaded.
Aye, but we don't take stowaways,
he growled.
I'll pay.
Jonah's hands shook as he thrust the bag of coins towards the captain.
Just take me with you. I need to get as far away from here as possible.
The captain eyed the bag suspiciously, but finally nodded.
Get aboard. We leave soon.
Jonah climbed aboard, his heart racing with a mix of fear and relief. He had done it. He was running from Nineveh. No, he was running from God. For a time the sea was calm, and Jonah thought perhaps his plan had worked. He found a quiet spot in the bowels of the ship and fell into an uneasy sleep, the sound of the waves lulling him. But soon the winds began to pick up. The gentle rocking of the ship turned violent as the storm descended without warning. The sky blackened and the sea thrashed against the vessel with terrifying force. Jonah was jolted awake as the ship heaved, throwing him against the wooden beams. The sailors above deck shouted in panic, their voices drowned out by the roaring wind.
What's going on?
Jonah muttered, stumbling to his feet. He made his way to the deck, where chaos reigned. The sailors were trying to keep the ship afloat, but the storm was too powerful, the waves crashing over them like angry fists.
Why is this happening?
One of the sailors cried.
This storm is unnatural. Someone on this ship has angered the gods.
Panic spread among the crew as they cast lots, a desperate attempt to find out who was responsible for their impending doom. The lots fell to Jonah. All eyes turned to him. Jonah's heart sank. He knew. He had been running, and now God had found him.
It's me.
Jonah whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm.
I am the reason for this storm.
The sailors stared at him in disbelief.
What have you done, you jackass?
I'm a prophet.
Jonah confessed.
I was commanded by the Lord to go to Nineveh, but I ran. This storm, it's because of me.
The captain's eyes narrowed.
What do we do now?
Jonah swallowed hard, the weight of his guilt pressing down on him.
You have to throw me into the sea. It's the only way to save yourselves.
The sailors hesitated, but the storm only grew worse. Reluctantly, they grabbed Jonah and with heavy hearts threw him overboard. The sea swallowed Jonah, and for a moment there was silence. The storm ceased, and the waters calmed. The sailors watched in awe as their ship was spared, but Jonah sank deeper into the cold, dark abyss. The weight of his defiance pulled him down into the depths of the ocean. But just as Jonah thought he would drown, something massive moved beneath him. A great fish, sent by God, rose from the depths and swallowed him whole. Inside the belly of the fish, Jonah sat in utter darkness. The stench was unbearable, the air thick and oppressive. He was alive, but barely. For 3 days, Jonah remained in the fish, alone with his thoughts, his regret, and his despair.
I'm sorry.
Jonah whispered into the darkness, his voice broken.
I was afraid. I didn't want to go to Nineveh. But now I see that I can't run from you, Lord.
Jonah's heart ached with remorse. He realized that no matter how far he ran, he could not escape the will of God. There, in the belly of the fish, he prayed. He prayed for forgiveness, for mercy, and for the courage to do what he had been asked. On the 3rd day, the fish rose to the surface and, with a great heave, spat Jonah onto the shore. Covered in slime and smelling of death, Jonah lay on the sand, gasping for air. He was alive. God's voice came to him once more, gentle this time.
Go to Nineveh, Jonah. Deliver my message.
This time Jonah did not hesitate. Nineveh was as terrible as Jonah had feared. The streets were filled with corruption, the people cruel and greedy. But Jonah marched through the city, his voice unwavering as he proclaimed God's message.
40 days!
Jonah cried out.
In 40 days, this city will be destroyed unless you repent.
To his astonishment, the people of Nineveh listened. From the lowest beggar to the king himself, they tore their clothes in mourning and turned from their wicked ways. Even the king, a man of great power, knelt in the dirt, begging for forgiveness. Jonah stood outside the city, watching as Nineveh repented. He had expected their destruction, hoped for it even. But instead, God showed mercy. Jonah's heart burned with frustration.
I knew it!
He muttered.
I knew you would forgive them, Lord. After everything they've done, you just let them go. I came all this way. And for what?
God's voice was calm but firm.
Jonah, is it right for you to be angry? Should I not show mercy to a city full of people and even animals who were lost but have now turned to me?
Jonah fell silent, the weight of God's words pressing down on him. He had been so focused on his own fear, his own desires, that he had forgotten the power of God's mercy. Jonah sat in the silence, watching the city he had once feared, and slowly he began to understand. And so, Jonah learned that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, redemption is always possible. Jonah sat outside the city, staring at Nineveh in the distance. The sun was sinking lower, casting long shadows across the barren land. His body ached with exhaustion, his mind heavy with thoughts that wouldn't settle. The wind rustled through the dried grass around him, the silence between him and God now louder than the booming voice that had sent him here in the first place. He had done what he was asked to do. He had delivered the message. The people had repented, and the city had been spared. But Jonah's heart still wrestled with anger, with confusion, with his inability to fully understand why things had unfolded the way they had. God's voice echoed in his mind.
Should I not have mercy?
It was such a simple question, yet Jonah had no simple answer. His chest tightened. He had wanted Nineveh to burn. How could such evil people be forgiven so easily? His fists clenched, recalling the wickedness of the city as he had walked through its streets. He had seen the cruelty, the brokenness, the weight of sin in the eyes of those who lived there. How could God overlook all that? How could he wipe the slate clean with just a wave of repentance? The sun dipped lower, and Jonah sighed. He looked down at his hands, calloused from his journey, and thought about his own sins, his own disobedience. He had run. He had tried to escape God's will. He had been swallowed by the sea, trapped in the belly of the fish. Yet even in that moment of despair, God had shown mercy to him. Jonah suddenly felt very small. He stood up and walked a little farther from the city, his feet crunching on the dry earth. He found a small hill where he could sit and rest. But he felt the anger rising again, that knot in his stomach tightening.
Why should Nineveh, this place of filth, be forgiven so easily?
Jonah's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden miraculous sight. A plant, large and leafy, sprang up beside him, its wide branches shading him from the burning sun. He looked at the plant in surprise, feeling the coolness of the shade wash over him. For the first time in days, Jonah felt a moment of peace. He leaned back against the plant, letting his weary body relax.
Thank you,
Jonah whispered, assuming God had provided this small comfort as a sign of approval. But the peace didn't last. The next morning, Jonah awoke to find the plant shriveled and dead. A worm had eaten through its roots overnight, leaving Jonah exposed to the harsh sun once again. His anger flared, hotter than before.
Why give me something only to take it away?
He groaned and cursed the heat, the dead plant, the city of Nineveh, everything.
Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?
God's voice came again, calm and gentle. Jonah seethed, fists clenched, voice rising.
Yes, I am angry enough to die. You gave me the plant, and now it's gone. What was the point?
God's response cut through the silence like a whisper of truth.
You are concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and perished overnight. Should I not also be concerned about Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals?
Jonah was stunned into silence. His anger began to unravel in the face of the undeniable truth. He sat down slowly, feeling the weight of God's word settle over him. He had cared so deeply about a plant that lasted only a day. But God cared about an entire city of people. People he had created, people he had loved even in their wickedness. Jonah realized that he had been so focused on justice and punishment that he had forgotten about mercy, about second chances. He had forgotten that he too had been spared. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of the sea. Jonah's anger dissolved into sorrow, not for Nineveh, but for himself. He had let his pride and hatred cloud his heart, and now, sitting in the open air, with the dead plant beside him, he understood the lesson God was teaching him. He could not choose who deserved mercy. He could not hold others to a standard he himself had failed to meet. Jonah stood, gazing out at the horizon, knowing that the story was not about Nineveh's destruction, but about redemption. It had always been about redemption, from the moment Jonah had tried to flee to the moment he stood before the city and saw it turn to God. In his heart, Jonah knew that this was not a defeat. It was a victory for grace. And though the city of Nineveh remained, Jonah's own journey had come full circle. He had faced the darkness of his own heart and found that God's light was brighter, God's mercy deeper than he could ever comprehend. As Jonah walked away from the city, leaving behind the remnants of his anger and pride, he was no longer the same man who had fled from God's call. He had seen the power of repentance, the strength of mercy, and the gift of forgiveness, not just for Nineveh, but for himself as well. And in the end, Jonah understood that mercy was not something to be earned, but a gift given freely, even to those who least deserved it.
What happens when a man once trusted by the Son of God makes a deal with the devil for 30 pieces of silver? Dive into the gripping and emotional journey of Judas Iscariot, whose betrayal changed history forever. Would you make the same choice? In the annals of biblical history, few stories are as tragic and haunting as that of Judas Iscariot, a man who walked in the light of Christ yet ultimately succumbed to the darkness within, making a deal with the devil that led to the betrayal of the Son of God. Our story will delve into the suspense, the emotional turmoil, and the tragic decisions that Judas made, serving as a timeless warning about the dangers of temptation and the devastating consequences of making deals with the devil. It was a warm evening in Bethany. The disciples gathered at the home of Simon the leper, enjoying a meal together with Jesus. The atmosphere was filled with camaraderie, the scent of food mingling with the gentle murmur of conversation. Among them sat Judas Iscariot, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts.
Master, the woman is here again,
one of the disciples whispered, nodding toward the door. Mary, a woman known for her devotion to Jesus, approached him with an alabaster jar of expensive perfume. In a quiet yet powerful act of worship, she broke the jar and poured the perfume over Jesus' feet, wiping them with her hair. The room filled with the rich fragrance, and all eyes turned to her. Judas's gaze, however, was not one of admiration. His eyes narrowed as he calculated the value of the perfume.
"What is she doing?"
he muttered, irritation evident in his voice.
"Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages."
His words, though seemingly righteous, concealed his true intentions. Judas had been helping himself to the group's money for some time, and he saw this act as a missed opportunity to enrich himself. Jesus looked at Judas, his eyes penetrating the facade.
Leave her alone.
He said gently but firmly.
She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. She has poured this perfume on me to prepare for my burial.
The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Judas, feeling the sting of Jesus' rebuke, looked away, but in his heart, resentment and greed began to fester. This was the moment the enemy seized upon, planting the seed that would grow into the darkest betrayal in history. As night fell, the disciples rested, but Judas lay awake, his mind plagued by the events of the day. Jesus' words replayed in his mind, each repetition deepening his resentment. The promise of power and wealth began to eclipse his loyalty to Jesus. A dark thought whispered through Judas's mind, a thought that both terrified and enticed him. The religious leaders in Jerusalem were seeking a way to arrest Jesus quietly, away from the adoring crowds. Judas knew he could provide that opportunity, and in return, he could demand a price. The next day, Judas made his way to the chief priests. His heart pounded as he entered the chamber where they were gathered, discussing their plans to eliminate Jesus.
"What will you give me if I deliver him over to you?"
Judas asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The chief priest, Caiaphas, studied Judas for a moment, then nodded to one of the temple guards. The guard stepped forward, handing Judas a small bag of silver coins. The 30 pieces of silver jingled softly, a sound that filled the silent chamber.
30 pieces of silver,
Caiaphas said, his voice cold and matter-of-fact.
a fair price for a man like him.
Judas hesitated for a heartbeat, but the lure of the silver was too strong. He reached out and took the bag, feeling its weight in his hand. The deal was struck, and Judas was now bound to his tragic course.
I will lead you to him,
Judas said, his voice hollow, betraying the turmoil within. The night of the Passover arrived, and Jesus gathered his disciples in the upper room for what would be their final meal together. As they reclined at the table, an uneasy tension hung in the air, as if each disciple could sense the impending betrayal.
Truly, I tell you,
Jesus began, his voice filled with sorrow.
one of you will betray me.
A murmur of disbelief spread through the group. Each disciple, their hearts heavy with fear and confusion, asked,
Surely not I, Lord.
Even Judas, playing his role, echoed the question.
Surely not I, Rabbi.
Jesus' gaze rested on Judas, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath.
You have said so.
Jesus replied, his voice heavy with the weight of what was to come. The meal continued, but Judas's mind was elsewhere. The bag of silver felt like a millstone around his neck, and every word from Jesus seemed to pierce his soul. Yet he was determined to go through with his plan. After the supper, Jesus led his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane. The night was quiet, the air thick with anticipation. Judas had slipped away earlier, and now he approached the garden with soldiers at his back, their torches casting flickering shadows on the olive trees. As Judas stepped into the clearing, he saw Jesus praying, his face etched with sorrow. The other disciples were nearby, some of them asleep, unaware of the danger that was closing in.
Rabbi?
Judas greeted, forcing the words through the tightness in his throat. He stepped forward and kissed Jesus on the cheek, the prearranged sign to the soldiers.
Judas,
Jesus said, his voice filled with sorrow and disappointment.
are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?
The question lingered in the air, a final chance for Judas to turn back. But it was too late. The soldiers seized Jesus, and the disciples, in a panic, scattered into the night. As Jesus was led away, the reality of Judas's actions began to weigh on him. He had betrayed not just any man, but the Messiah, the one he had once followed and loved. The silver, once so enticing, now felt like a curse. The following morning, as Jesus was condemned by the Sanhedrin, Judas's guilt became unbearable. The events of the night played out in his mind like a nightmare from which he could not wake. The 30 pieces of silver, now a symbol of his treachery, burned in his hands. In a desperate attempt to undo what he had done, Judas returned to the chief priests and elders, the bag of silver clutched in his trembling hands.
I have sinned.
Judas cried, his voice thick with despair.
I have betrayed innocent blood.
But the religious leaders, who had been so eager to use Judas, now regarded him with cold indifference. Caiaphas sneered,
What is that to us? That's your responsibility.
Despair overwhelmed Judas. The silver coins clinked as he threw them across the temple floor, the sound echoing through the empty hall. He fled from the temple, his mind a storm of guilt and shame. With nowhere to turn, Judas made his way to a secluded spot outside the city. The weight of his betrayal crushed him, and the darkness that had whispered promises of wealth now offered only despair. In a final act of desperation, Judas took his own life, ending his tragic story in utter hopelessness. The 30 pieces of silver, stained with blood, were used by the chief priests to buy a potter's field, a place to bury strangers. The field, forever tainted by the blood money, would come to be known as the Field of Blood, a grim reminder of the cost of betrayal. Judas Iscariot's story is not just about one man's fall. It's a powerful warning to all who are tempted by the promises of the world. He walked with Jesus, saw his miracles, heard his teachings, and yet, for 30 pieces of silver, he was willing to betray the Son of God. His story illustrates how even those closest to the truth can be led astray by their desires. Judas's downfall was gradual, beginning with small compromises and growing into a full-blown betrayal. He made a deal with the devil, and in the end, it cost him everything: his life, his soul, and his place among the apostles. But Judas' story also offers a lesson about the power of choice. At every step, he had the opportunity to turn back, to repent, and to seek forgiveness. But each time, he chose the path that led him further into darkness. His final act of despair was a tragic end to a life that could have been redeemed. While Judas's story ends in tragedy, the broader narrative of the Bible offers hope. No one is beyond redemption, no matter how far they have fallen. Although Judas chose despair, others who failed Jesus, like Peter, found forgiveness and a new beginning. Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times, wept bitterly when he realized what he had done. But unlike Judas, Peter sought forgiveness. After his resurrection, Jesus restored Peter, giving him the chance to lead and spread the gospel. Peter's story stands in stark contrast to Judas's, showing that even the greatest sins can be forgiven if we turn back to God. The message is clear. No matter what deals we may have made with the devil, no matter how far we have strayed, there is always a way back to the light. God's grace is greater than any sin, and His love can redeem even the darkest of hearts. The story of Judas Iscariot is a powerful and emotionally charged story that serves as a warning about the dangers of making deals with the devil. His life, filled with suspense and intrigue, is a cautionary tale for all who are tempted to compromise their faith for worldly gain. But it also reminds us of the hope we have in Christ, who offers redemption and forgiveness to all who turn to Him. In the end, no deal with the devil is worth the cost. The fleeting pleasures and gains of this world pale in comparison to the eternal life and peace that come from following Jesus. Let Judas' story be a warning to us all, and let us commit ourselves to living lives that honor God, resisting the devil's schemes and holding fast to our faith.
Strength within you.